Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 526 for the 18th of November 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. Sydney, Australia doesn't know what to think about this time of the year. Some days it's cold, some days it's hot, sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's not. That sounds like a Dr. Seuss book, doesn't it? Coming up on this week's show, I catch up with Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia, and a success story. One of the things that the guerrilla skepticism people have been chasing, and a story I've been keeping an eye on for a while, is this facilitated communication and the universities that still push this outdated idea. Susan will bring us up to date on this story, and as I said, it's a tale of success, good skeptical activism. Following that, it's more from Skepticon Australia, Skepticon 2018 here in Sydney about 3 weeks ago. Maynard chats to some magicians. Any magicians out there listening to this show, or if you know any magicians, they may find this very interesting indeed. We had a wonderful entertainer come up from Melbourne to do magic at the convention dinner, Skepticon dinner, which knocked everybody's socks off. In fact, maybe that was one of his tricks, knocking people's socks off. I don't know. He did some wonderful card routines and other routines, and his name is Nick Kay. Maynard also chats to magician Peter Rodgers. Peter Rodgers is a long-time member of the Australian Skeptics here in Sydney. He was the resident magician on the committee for many, many, many years. He still is part of the broader organisation, and if we ever have any queries to do with magic, he's the man we turn to. Magicians and skepticism have had a long association. Of course, we think of James Randi. Especially in the early days, it was the magicians who could see some of the tricks of the so-called psychics, like design duplication, as it's called, where somebody draws a secret drawing, seals it in an envelope, but the so-called psychic can still magically determine what's in the envelope and recreate the drawing. Peter is also a history buff when it comes to magic, especially magic in Australia, and I learnt a lot from this interview, and I hope you will too. Nick Kay and Peter Rodgers, the magicians, coming up a little later on with Maynard. Then to round off the show, we've got Michelle Franklin, our relatively new reporter from Darwin. She's going to be talking about biocontrol. This is where the science comes into the Skeptic Zone when we talk about the podcast for science and reason. This is the science part. Biocontrol and cane toads. Now, when I was young, I lived up near where Heidi Robertson, the raw skeptic, lives, up in the north coast area of New South Wales, and cane toads were everywhere. So I think it was especially during the summer months, big ugly toads that are an introduced species. Well, Michelle's going to be talking about that and general biocontrol. And Michelle would like you to know that her report today is a summary of a presentation she gave at Skepticamp. In fact, it was a Skepticamp in Brisbane in 2016. And what a wonderful thing Skepticamp is. Sadly, we didn't have one in Sydney this year. Maybe we should put our socks on that were blown off by the magicians earlier and get to organising a Skepticamp in Sydney for 2019. I've learnt a lot of interesting things via going to Skepticamps over the years, especially here in Sydney, and I noticed they're around the world. And in fact, I'll link to Skepticamp in this week's show notes under the segment here for Michelle Franklin. A few more announcements from me at the end of the show, but now it's time for me to run downstairs. And since it's such a nice day, I'm going to have some champagne, white chocolate, and a little bit of cheese with chili, ghost pepper cheese. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. And joining me now all the way from Salinas, California, as she does from time to time on the Skeptic Zone, it's Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. Hello, Susan.
Hello, Richard. Hello, all you wonderful listeners out there.
Oh, I'm sure the listeners like being called wonderful. I think they're wonderful.
They are. They're great. They're great.
Now, Susan, a couple of months ago, I haven't got the exact date on my fingertips here, we spoke about a very concerning issue, which is known as facilitated communication. Can you give our audience a quick update to what that means exactly?
Facilitated communication is an outdated pseudoscience tactic used to communicate with people who are non-communicative. That's a mouthful.
People who have been unable to communicate for whatever reason. There's somebody comes along called the facilitator who will guide their hand over a board of letters, for example, or study their eyes and say they're looking at this letter and looking at that letter and seem to interpret what the person is trying to say.
Absolutely. It's the Ouija board effect. Some people call it the clever Hans method, and other people say it's like swinging a pendulum in some cases. These people are not communicating. The facilitator is actually the person who's looking at the keyboard or the letter board and interpreting what is being said. It does not work. And there's a huge description on the Wikipedia page for facilitated communication if anybody really wants more details. We have case studies on there as well, why it appears to work and it doesn't. Well, it's a pseudoscience that was discredited over 30 years ago, and many universities in the United States continue to support it by teaching classes, allowing workshops, having some of the faculty run classes and give credit to the students who are taking the classes. So about April of this year, I formed a group with some very amazing people who decided that we were done with that. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's been discredited years ago. We need to hold these universities responsible. And so what we did is we created a very, very well-written professional letter with over 30 professionals, most of them with PhDs after their name, who are in the medical field, the education field, autism, communication, many from Australia, actually. Now, sent this very professional letter to the University of Northern Iowa, which had a workshop that it was going to be running a month or so later in United States. So we sent the letter to them. They wrote us back saying, that's nice. And they proceeded with their conference, and they said that they were going to have another conference in 2019. And it was their fifth one they ran. So we called in the media. We got the media involved, especially local media, plus many people in the skeptic community wrote and tweeted to the university, and we were relentless because there was many newspaper articles, well, not newspaper, but media articles printed about the university supporting facilitated communication. Their Wikipedia page was obviously had to be changed to say that they supported facilitated communication. And after a while, they finally relented and said, we're not going to have facilitated communication at their university anymore. And we have since moved on to other universities. And just today, we had a reporter went to talk to the University of Northern Iowa and said, what's going on over there? And they said, and they officially announced that they will no longer be supporting facilitated communication. And basically they said, leave us alone. Just don't bother us anymore. And we're like, okay, thank you so much. We did ask them if they had, because we know they still have some faculty on staff that do teach facilitated communication. And we asked them through the reporter, and they said that they aren't supporting it. So we're going to keep an eye on this university, and we're going to go ahead and go after other universities and use the same formula of asking them politely, giving them a very professionally worded letter of intent saying that, this is a discredited practice. We, the undersigned, all 30 or so people who are experts in this field say that this is not a good idea to do. And if they don't in their practice, then we will go to the local media and then the bigger media and pretty much shame them into ending the practice with facilitated communication. The article that just came out today is going to be able to be something that we could use to other universities, as a way of saying, look, University of Northern Iowa ended their practice. Why don't you? Because I think that will be helpful, because the University of Northern Iowa has ended it. And if nobody really wants to be the last university out there still practicing pseudoscience.
So would you say this is another example of guerrilla skepticism at work, or is it broader than this?
It is guerrilla skepticism, because it is taking the average person's passion to focus on one specific problem in the world. Absolutely, we're not going to be able to stop all pseudoscience in all universities with this one tactic. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to show people how to narrowly pick one area and focus on it and end it. And then from there, take what you've learned and then move to the next pseudoscience or the next university or the next project. I think that these things work best when we're narrow, clearly defined goals with very small groups of people working on it as well. We find that this has been very successful in a guerrilla way, just in that we're small batches of targeted attacks. That sounds very aggressive, but it is it shouldn't be aggressive.
No, I think I know what you mean. It's a concentrated effort. It's people focusing on the topic at hand and getting the job done, which I think is terrific. And by the way, I guess it's time for a little update. How is guerrilla skepticism doing generally?
Oh my gosh, we've added quite a few new editors after SciCon this year. We were also at the Australian conference as well as QED. It was a fabulous time. We have just added our 720th Wikipedia page, and we've just hit 33.7 million page views.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a difference. We're making a difference a little at a time. As I say, we're not going to completely rewrite Wikipedia right away and get fantastic information on everything, on every paranormal topic everywhere. It's an astronomical project, plus the fact we're trying to do it in all languages. But it's satisfying knowing that we're fighting back. We're trying, and just one page at a time, we're working our way through it. Instead of saying it's insurmountable, it can't be done, we're saying, yes, this is a crazy idea to rewrite Wikipedia pages concerning science and pseudoscience, but let's just get started. One of the benefits of writing this letter to these universities in the way we have, with the experts cited on the letter, along with information on where the university can get better information if they need it, is that we've put the universities on notice. Once they acknowledge receipt of our letter, then in the future, if anyone tries to sue the university for mispractices because of facilitated communication, well, they're liable, because they now have officially been told that facilitated communication is harmful. It is pseudoscience. So if a lawyer is interested or a family is trying to sue the universities, they can.
Well, Susan Gerbic, once again, thank you very much for the update. It's good to know that this facilitated communication may be on the wane. Actually, it's been around for far too long. I remember hearing about it years and years and years ago, and it's always been regarded with great suspicion. So all power to you at Guerrilla Skepticism, and if people want to find out more, where can they go?
Facebook is the best place to find all the information. Just follow me on Facebook, and we will update as needed.
All right, there you are, folks. There's the clue, Facebook. I'll add a link in this week's show notes. Well, another interesting story there, folks, from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia and Susan Gerbic all the way over there in Salinas, California. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Time travelers, cursed paintings, ghostly apparitions, mysterious creatures. The world is filled with incredible and seemingly inexplicable stories, but often things are not what they seem. If you are like me and you too want to learn how to discern fact from fiction, I invite you to join me every 2 weeks on my YouTube channel. I am Massimo Polidoro, and we'll investigate together and discover the truth behind many stranger stories.
To join Massimo Polidoro every 2 weeks, head to YouTube and look for Stranger Stories.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
Well, I'll just chat to our magician who is our act tonight. What is your name, sir?
Mr. Nick Kay.
Hey, Nick, now tell me, around Melbourne, where would people see you performing normally?
Well, I perform regularly at Holy Moly, which is a mini golf club, a mini golf nightclub, actually. Yeah, I got a residency there recently, and it's probably the most fun place you can come and see some magic.
Because you'd be doing close-up stuff, so is it cards and a bit of sleight of hand? What do you do?
Indeed. Close-up magic to the highest order, from mentalism to pickpocketing, although I try not to announce that too often, otherwise it just makes it harder to steal those watches. But ultimately, the close-up with coins, cards, anything I can borrow from people, like rings, phones.
Oh, because I'm always scared. Like, whenever I'm around with the amazing Randy, I'm always checking my stuff and that, because I know he can steal stuff if he wants to, and I'm always scared. Magicians scare me because you've got talents beyond mortal people.
That's understandable, and I try to debunk that and just say, and more importantly, what I want to make sure that my audience has is a good time.
Oh, well, I'm sure they will here. Actually, what is your, like Penn and Teller, their ultimate act is the bullet catch. That's the one they're known for. Have you got something, the equivalent of the bullet catch? What's your big one that you would finish an act with if you had a proper stage show? Have you got something?
I have a few reputation makers, amongst the magic community. I think my version of the invisible deck is quite popular.
Wow.
Yes, and I also have a coin piece, which I'm looking at submitting. I'm going to stay tight-lipped about this one because I do want to submit it to the good folks at Full Us, hoping that it might end up with me an opportunity to compete at Full Us in Las Vegas.
Yeah, you should be on that show because they love their close-up magic.
Indeed, and it's a coin piece, which is my favorite discipline in magic, which I've shown to all of my heroes over the years. The guys, the very reason that I perform magic, especially coin magic, people like Eric Jones and David Roth, amazing guys, and I've showed them this particular routine, and they've gone, I have no idea. So I feel like that's in with a chance.
Okay.
So fingers crossed.
Now, Teller, when he was younger, used to make a habit of palming everything when he was a young kid from his mum. He'd get their credit card and he'd carry it around all day. Is that the kind of level of dedication you need to be able to hide things well with close-up magic?
Indeed it is. I'll be the type of guy that will actually hold out in palm position or just in various holdouts in my hand. I've actually shaken hands with people at events while having things secretly palmed in my hand.
Wow.
I've taken it to the extent where I'll be driving from one place to another trying to see if I can actually make it all day without anyone noticing something in my hand.
Wow.
Like a 50-cent piece, for example.
Wow. Look, the best piece of magic I had performed on me and with me was when the amazing Randy did the book trick on me. We went to the bookshop in Melbourne. It was in Big and Books. And he did the whole pick a book on the thing and read it. And he did that, and I know I could probably go online and read one of the many ways you can do the book trick, but I don't want to. I want to enjoy the fact that I had some magic performed on me and I've got no idea how he did it.
Indeed it is, and it's one of the things that when I do get the skeptic types that, that they get frustrated that they don't know how it's done, and I just try to reassure them, listen, if you knew how I was doing everything, I would not be worth the money being spent for me to be here to entertain you. And then in that moment, they just sort of go, well, you're right. And in that moment, they're just willing to accept everything that sort of happens in front of them from then on in. It works really well.
That's a very good explanation. Now, Penn and Teller, we mentioned the bullet catch. What's your favourite trick of theirs, since they're the skeptical magicians, really?
Wow, that bullet catch is really something.
It's pretty special.
Yeah,
and I love how, I think it was Penn said, look, if you asked me how I did that and I told you once, maybe that's the way it was done, maybe it wasn't. Because, really, there's a couple of ways they could have done it, but none of them seem safe. But he said, if you think we would really go on stage with a loaded gun, yeah, they wouldn't.
Exactly.
So, wow, it's amazing, isn't it?
I've tried to come up with many versions myself for my own shows. The legalities, obviously, in Australia and Melbourne are very, very hindering and that sort of thing. I came up with a method hoping that I could do one with a paintball gun.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, that would incur a $20,000 fine.
Really?
Indeed it would, sir, yes. So
I thought if it was part of a stage show, you could get some sort of dispensation from the authorities.
When they understood what I was actually intending to use it for, they declined my armorer's license, and they said, we are not going to allow you to do that. And I went, okay.
Okay. Right, so what are the other famous magicians that you like? What are some of the ones you like? With the amazing Randy B there, because he was an escape artist. You don't do that sort of thing, do you?
I do indeed,
but
yes.
That involves hurting yourself and dislocating stuff, doesn't it?
It does, and sometimes, we do incur injuries throughout life, and then we find out later on in life how useful they can actually become, like my shoulder, for example, in a basketball fall. So,
wow, okay.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, very handy. So, he's one. What's one we might not have heard of that you think, wow, that's a good magician, more people should know about that person?
Wow. Amongst the amazing, local talents, I'm here in Sydney, and so many of my friends who were, to some degree, my heroes, and now I have the pleasure of actually calling them friends, as people like Phoenix Montgomery, there's people like Adam Matter, Vincent Cow, who represented Australia at the FISM competition, which is essentially the Olympics of magic. An amazing talent. I believe he's only 18, just turned 19. And he's an amazing talent. He was very proudly brought us home a 5th position at the World Championships. And if you see the caliber of magic and creativity from such a young guy, he's really going to help put Australia on the map when it comes to...
I was just thinking, if I went to go see a magician in Sydney, I don't know where I'd go to. What are the good venues in Melbourne to see magicians in?
Well, there's actually many venues. Obviously, there is my residency, which is at Holy Moly. There is also a couple of weekly or monthly events that we have. For example, we have Top Hat Tuesday, which is on the very first Tuesday of every month at a venue called the 86 in Smith Street in Collingwood. Another great venue is the Laneway Theatre, where performances happen quite regularly. The Laneway Theatre is owned by one of Australia's greatest magicians and one of my mentors and heroes. His name is Tim Ellis. So he actually built a theatre in his home, which is the Laneway Theatre, and he performs there regularly as well as others. And there's another thing that we hold there called Slight Night, in which we gather 4 of the best magicians who were in Melbourne at the time. Sometimes they're international acts that come and visit. We'll invite them to come and perform. And you can see some of the best close-up magic within this small little theatre that holds about 40 people, and it's just a great atmosphere and an even better show.
Look, why do you think magicians are involved with skepticism? Because there's a lot of skeptics are magicians. Is it because they fool people for a living, so when they see people scamming, they go, hang on a minute?
I think there is some degree, and I think for myself, understanding, ultimately for me, what I enjoy about it most is when you meet the skeptics and they theorize how your routines and your tricks are achieved. I really listen, and the reason for that is because I don't want to adopt any method that people might seem as obvious, which for me makes my magic level a lot more deceptive, and as a result, has resulted in me in the magic community having a little more of a status. And now I have the opportunity to actually go to conventions. For example, I was at GenieCon here in New South Wales, and I was lecturing there. And I'll be in Brisbane next year at the Assembly, which was run by Sean Piper. So. When you start thinking this way and really trying to adopt methods that are going to fool people, as challenging as they are for you to actually master these sleights, in the end, ultimately, all you're going to be doing is generating routines that are going to be your reputation makers, and people are really going to enjoy them.
Wow, it's been great chatting to you about this. I'm looking forward to saying you're on. Then I'm going to sit in the audience and have a really good look at what you're doing there. Where can people see you online or find out a bit more about you online?
Indeed, you can find me online at nickkmagic.com, and there's links there to my Facebook and, of course, my Instagram. Feel free to drop me a line, and thank you so much for your time, Maynard.
Thank you. Well, it's now Sunday morning here of the final day of the Skepticon 2018, and it's a bit of an overcast day, but I'm here with Peter Rodgers. How are you?
I'm very well.
Look, I was introduced to you as you are the guy who knows everything about magic. Why is skepticism and magicians so closely connected?
Magicians are all into fraud. They do it themselves, but they admit it. And there's a lot of people that the skeptics are against, that psychics that use the same methods as magicians. And
yeah. What do you think of is the proportion of people that are genuinely being fraudulent and the ones that are convinced that they can do it and fool themselves? Have you ever kind of worked out what that ratio would be?
I don't know. It's 50-50. I think a lot of people that water divining, I think a lot of them are true believers, but they're fooling themselves. I think fortune tellers are the same. You know, some people think they can do it. They just don't understand averages, how things actually turn out.
And Peter, as a magician, we had Nick Kay from Melbourne doing some close-up magic kind of stuff there last night. What's been the area of magic that fascinates you? You like the close-up card work? What's the stuff you like?
I like close-up and card magic. I'm more interested in the impossibility of it. I don't get out and perform a lot, and I've never wanted to be a performer, to be honest. I just like to play with people's minds, to make them just so that can't happen.
And what do you like at palming cards and that sort of thing? You good at that?
Oh, I do a lot of sleight of hand, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And how much practice does that take? I was talking to Nick last night about how Teller used to go around the house as a kid just palming things all day, just keeping them there to see how long. Is that what you got to do?
Yeah, I'd be I say playing with magic all the time. It's 24 hours a day you're thinking about magic.
Is that something naughty kids did before the internet? They basically thought, hey, hang on, I might get into a magic act.
Yeah, kids still do it with the internet. Actually, they don't go out performing so much now. They actually learn magic on the internet. I don't think it's a good way to do it, but there's a lot of magic on the internet.
Yeah, and of course, whenever you do a trick now, because everybody knows everything because of the internet, everyone wants to know how did you do that trick all the time, and they get really annoyed when you don't tell them, when in fact, back in the day, that was just part of the show.
Yeah, well, look, if you show someone a trick and they're amazed, they'll have a memory for the rest of their life. That was completely impossible. If they learn how it's done, within a week they've forgotten it. They just say, oh, is that all? They're very disappointed when they do learn how it's done.
This is what I mentioned when the amazing Randy did the book trick to me in a bookshop in Melbourne a couple of years ago. I could probably go and look up one of the ways he might have done that, but that might not have been the way he did it anyway, because there's a number of ways to do it. I just enjoy being amazed by the whole thing and being part of it.
Yeah. Once you know how it's done, it's lost its mystery, it's lost its real purpose and been done. So, magic is the illusion of something impossible happening. When you know how it's done, you think, oh, I could have done that if I knew that, and you lose interest in it, and within a few months you forget it anyway.
And who've been some of your favourite all-time Australian magicians? Because they tend to get a bit overshadowed by the overseas imports. Who are the ones that we should remember from back in the day and even now?
We've actually had a lot of magicians in Australia. The two well-known ones are Les Levant, who was popular during the war and after the war, very popular in England, but he came from, he lived in Bellevue Hill in Sydney, and Maurice Rookland, I call him an Australian, he actually came to Australia as a 5-year-old, again lived in Sydney, toured Europe and New Zealand and Australia, again back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. But my true love is probably a gentleman by the name of Jean Hugard. He was actually born in Toowoomba, and as a young man he took up magic, he was interested in magic. He started to work for a bank. This is back in the 1800s.
Okay.
Worked for a bank, was transferred to Burketown. Now, if you know where Burketown is, to get to Burketown, there's still a gravel road up just underneath the Gulf of Carpentaria. Didn't like working in a bank, so the big export from Burketown in those days, and it still is, I think, was meat. And he bought a refrigeration plant, left the bank. There was a blackout, or he lost electricity, he lost a lot of money. So he thought, I've got to take up magic as a profession. And he started doing magic, went down to Charters Towers, had a big magic complex there. And this is about 1910. He was toured Australia as a magician. 1916, by then he had 4 kids. But he left Australia, he went to Fiji, and then he went on to America. Worked in Coney Island for 10 years, and the Depression hit. And a magic supply dealer in America saw he was in hard times, not having any money, and he said, will you write some instructions for me from my tricks I'm selling? And then he started to write books, and Jean Hugard became one of the greatest magic writers of the 20th century. He had a background in magic. He wrote books like the Encyclopedia of Card Tricks, Railroad to Card Technique, Expert Card Technique.
And they're still relevant today, of course.
Still relevant today. They are great books. Hugard actually died. His real name was Boyce, Gerard Boyce, but he called himself Jean Hugard as a writer. He died in 1959. I think it was about August or September.
Who is the magician's magician? Like, obviously Houdini always comes up, but is he the one that everyone looks up to, or is it one that the layperson might not know as well?
Look, magicians really don't. A lot of magicians don't like Houdini. They thought he was great at promoting himself, but his actual technique at magic wasn't that great. He was good at promotion, showmanship, and getting publicity. He was great at publicity. Magician, probably the best manipulator of the 20th century, early 20th century, was a gentleman by the name of Cardini. And I mentioned Cardini because he actually called himself Cardini when he was in Australia. His actual name was Pickford.
Now, of course, that sounds like he was a specialist in the close-up magic.
Well, he was a manipulator on stage. He used to produce cards and cigarettes, and back in the days when it was polite to smoke. But he had a perfect act. Another magician who you probably never heard of is Di Vernon, who was definitely into close-up magic. And all magicians, especially magicians who have been into close-up magic and card tricks that have been around in the last 70-odd years will have heard of Di Vernon. Probably had the most influence of any magician. Originally from Canada, then he went down to New York as a young man. And then in the 1960s, he went to Los Angeles to join the Magic Castle, which is a magician's club in Los Angeles. Stayed there until he died. He was in his 90s, and this is back in the early 1990s that he died.
And what about currently? Who are the ones that would be the top of their game worldwide at the moment?
Look, it depends what sort of magic you're interested in. It's like saying who's the top singer.
That's true.
It depends, you know.
Yeah, well, of course, you do have the ones that like doing the big stuff, like making half a city disappear, that kind of stuff. You've got your close-up magic,
Yeah, David Copperfield's probably the best known one. And Siegfried and Roy were big up until they had their accident 15 years or so back. But David Copperfield, Penn and Teller have a big show in Las Vegas.
Yes, I saw their show. It's a great range of acts they did. It was kind of a best-of show I saw. And, of course, they finished with the Bullet Catch, which they're quite well known from. But all the ones on the way to get there were interesting as well.
Yeah. If you see Penn and Teller, actually, they keep changing their show. So sometimes you go it and it's a great show, and you might go a few months later and they'll have changed the routines and you might be disappointed. So it won't be quite as good, or because they changed it around. And then you might go back a few months later and see another show. Some of the routines they do will be the same and some will be different. So they keep it's look, every time you go to Las Vegas, it's worth going back because you'll always see something new in their show. It's just that some of their material you might not like as well as others, but
because when they started out, they were a little bit like, they seemed to be the anti-magicians, like doing the cup and balls with the plastic see-through cups and stuff. And the great thing about that is that even when you see them doing it with the plastic see-through cup, you don't really learn that much more. It doesn't give anything away. When
they were new, a lot of magicians didn't like it because I said, this is all exposure. They're exposing the secrets. But I don't think they were. They did, as you say, the cups and balls with see-through cups. The point is, a layman still wouldn't know how it was done afterwards.
Exactly,
they were using misdirection, which is what all magic is.
Yes.
So, same principles, and a lay audience still didn't know how it was done.
What's the one trick you've seen anyone do during your entire life, and you pretty much know how much that's floored you? You're going, what the? Huh? What's the one trick that someone's done that's going, hang on, what?
I get fooled occasionally. I can remember just a close-up routine with 4 coins, magician passing his hands a few inches above the coins, and they seem to gather in the corner in one spot. They just seem to move around, and I was amazed the first time I saw it, but I don't sleep until I find out how it's done. So I don't think there's many tricks that I'm still fooled by. I might be fooled for a while, but I make an effort to find out how they're done.
Of course, we're here with scepticism. What's the one woo that really annoys you? What's the woo that gets your goat that annoys you most of all of them?
I don't like people claiming to be a genuine psychic or genuine at anything, but using trickery to achieve that and not admitting it. So I suppose I'm thinking of Uri Geller.
Right.
I have problems that Uri Geller made a lot of money in defrauding people. He now virtually, although he still can't say it out loud, he virtually admits to magicians that he is one of us.
And where's a website we could go that's got either a good history of magic or some stuff about magic in case we want to learn a bit more? What's one you could recommend to us?
I prefer books, actually, to websites.
Tell us a good book then, Peter.
If you want, it depends on whether you want to know the secrets or if you want to know the history of magic.
I reckon let's go with the history of magic, because a lot of people want to do the secrets, but that's like going to the blueprints of the whole thing. Let's find out who designed the car. Let's go that way,
Yeah. Look, if you look up books written by Edwin Dawes, D-A-W-E-S. He's from Hull in England, and he's written numerous books. If you just want to read about specific magicians, there's a lot of books published by Mike Haveney in America. He calls his publishing company Magic Words. He's written some of the books. He's written books on Harry Keller, who's a famous magician, on Carter the Great, another great magician. He's published a book on Les Levant. It was actually written by Kent Blackmore, who's from Sydney. A great book. These books been coming out. Some are still available. Some you might have to get second hand.
Some hot top tips there, Peter. We'll enjoy your final day here of Skepticon 2018. What's been your favourite moment from the conference this year so far?
I think the performance of Magic, naturally, at the banquet last night.
Yeah, that was pretty good there. Great. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Pete.
Good. Thank you, Maynard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Calling all Skeptic Zone listeners. Do you live in or near Glasgow, or are you planning to visit sometime? Then you're in luck, because the Glasgow Skeptics have got your Monday nights sorted. We're committed to filling up every available Monday night with talks on science and skepticism. Past speakers include Eugenie Scott, Jerry Coyne, Michael Marshall, Nate Phelps, Tom and Cecil from Cognitive Dissonance, P.Z. Myers, Richard Wiseman, A.C. Grayling, Noah Heath and Eli from The Scathing Atheist, Simon Singh, Rebecca Watson, and a multitude of local academics and skeptics. There's literally nothing better you can do on a Monday night in Glasgow that doesn't involve taking your clothes off. So come join us. We've also got a vibrant online community. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and get involved with the discussion. Glasgow Skeptics. Self-help for your brain.
Life is wild. With Michelle Franklin. Today, I want to talk about biocontrol. What does it mean to you, and what do you think of when you hear the word biocontrol? What I tend to find when I'm talking to people is that most Australians have vaguely heard of myxomatosis and calicivirus being used against rabbits. And if I'm lucky, maybe they remember back to Year 9 science when we learned about the moth Cactoblastis impacting on cactus populations. But in general, I find that most people tend to think of these as failures because we still have rabbits and we still have cactuses, so therefore, obviously, they think that biocontrol doesn't work. But the much more common reason that people seem to talk about it is when they bring up cane toads as a retort against any suggestion of scientists trying something new. For those listeners who are outside of Australia and may not know about cane toads, they're probably the most hated invasive species that we have. They were introduced deliberately about 80 years ago as a biocontrol agent, but they failed completely and became an invasive pest. All stages of their life cycle are poisonous, and just to add to their bad image, they're generally considered to be ugly. So now cane toads are the poster child for why scientists can't be trusted and biocontrol is a bad idea. This is really unfortunate because it's used against all manner of scientists when the argument against the thing that they're talking about falls down and the anti-science person resorts to attacking scientists as a whole. Yeah, well, scientists thought cane toads were a good idea, so look where that got us. Where did this image of the bumbling scientist who takes insane risks and doesn't consider consequences come from? How is it impacting on working scientists today? Where do we go wrong? And why has one big failure come to represent an entire ecological management system? And more importantly, what can we do to fix this? We all know that biocontrol has a terrible image and that many people fear the next cane toad. But we can and have learned a lot since this failure. Not only the failure in risk assessment that allowed cane toads to be introduced, and this is a risk that's been all but completely eliminated in modern biocontrol, but also the failure in science communication that is still plaguing us to this day. Science communication has some serious issues that need to be addressed at a very broad scale. But what I want to talk to you about today is how you, as a science enthusiast, can help the situation for the poor ecologist who is just trying to make things better and can't get past that damn cane toad. What I want you to do is to educate yourself so that when you hear people use this argument, you can say the all-important, well, actually, and then back it up with some interesting and memorable information. Let's start with the basics of what biocontrol is and how it's done today, because it is done a lot and it's done very well. The basic idea of biocontrol is about balancing advantages. When an animal or a plant is brought into a new place where it didn't exist before, it has certain advantages. Everything lives in an ecosystem, and most plants and animals have very specific pest species that have evolved with them and which live exclusively on them or on their very close relatives. So if you take a plant or animal, say, from South America and bring it to Australia, suddenly it experiences a world where the bulk of the pathogens and parasites just don't eat it because they haven't evolved to do so. Everything has a background parasite load that it has evolved to cope with, and when that is left behind in South America and the invasive species is suddenly free to grow and spread uninhibited, it has an advantage. Now, success in biocontrol doesn't mean that all of your target species die. Success can, in fact, be quite mediocre and hard to spot. It's not about wiping out the host. It's about developing an ongoing relationship between the agent and the host and establishing a self-sustaining population that will cycle through breeding and feeding and living off the target species and reducing the health of the target species and reducing the advantages that it was using to get ahead in its new environment. Step 1 is to find the agent. Usually this is done by going back to the place of origin and just looking around at what's eating it there. You start with a long list of potential agents, sometimes 100 or more species that you found living on this plant or animal. And then you start whittling that list down. For some it's easy because they're already known pests and in their native country, so you know that that's not going to work. That's the easy part. You shortlist maybe 20 or 30 agents, usually insects, but not always, and you test them. Step 2 is the hard part, but the rigorous testing and retesting that is done to every potential new agent is the reason that biocontrol is safe today. There's 2 basic tests that need to be performed. One is to find out if the agent can live on something else. This is the step that was missed with the cane toad. You have to be almost 100% sure that the agent can't survive without its host. The agent that you're looking for has to have evolved with the target host species, so it'll be completely dependent on it for survival. The way that you test for this is to take every conceivable off-target host, which is another way of saying any plant or animal that you're not trying to kill, and you put it in a cage with the agent and see if the agent can survive and breed. If it's even possible for them to survive on something other than the target host, then the agent is a failure and it can't be used. Then the second test is to set up the agent in a cage with the target host so it's happy and healthy and breeding, and then introduce every conceivable off-target host to that little system to see if there's any collateral damage. If a viable population living on a target species is capable of harming the native or desirable species in the new location, then again, it's a failure. So if an agent can pass tests 1 and 2, and it's not capable of surviving without its host, or able to do harm to the native ecosystem, and this takes years of testing to be sure of, then you can apply to the Australian government for permission to start releasing into the wild. This is the hardest step. They have extremely high standards, and sometimes agents can wait in review for years before the tests are accepted and the agent can be signed off for release. Often there's a cycle of retesting to satisfy the high standards before you can move on to the release trials. By this stage, the agent is pretty much guaranteed to be safe, and in many cases, release trials is when the agent fails. But in modern biocontrol, failure is when a host fails to establish or fails to impact on its target for whatever reason. If they just don't breed enough or survive in the wild at the levels necessary for success, that's what a failure is, and you'll likely never hear about it. But in the cases where biocontrol is successful, the story still isn't very dramatic or exciting. Successful biocontrol doesn't wipe out a target species. At best, it reduces it. It increases the pressure on that invasive species and takes away some of the advantages that it has been benefiting from. When an invasive species is exposed to a successful biocontrol agent, they interact. They affect one another and they shift their ecological equilibrium back to a point where the invasive species is a little less successful and its impacts are reduced. A good example of this is mimosa in the north of Australia. It's a horrible, prickly yet very pretty plant which in its native habitat grows to 2 or 3 metres tall and often has other plants growing amongst it. But in Australia, where there's little natural predation on it, it can grow to 4 or 5 metres tall, form dense, impenetrable thickets, and completely dominate vast tracts of land to the exclusion of all else. Until the very successful biocontrol methods are introduced into the picture, and it's brought back to a more reasonable height, and the canopy's opened up to allow sunlight and space to the understory, and now other plants can compete with it. That's when you move on to step 4, monitoring and maintenance. Populations will always fluctuate depending on seasons and conditions, and sometimes it's useful or even vital to keep introducing biocontrol agents at strategic intervals to manipulate the equilibrium and keep on top of populations. It's sometimes even necessary to water or fertilise the target species during the hard times and help it to survive in some areas in order to preserve the biocontrol agent's numbers, so that they're always there and ready to breed back up and reinfest new outbreaks when they happen. This is a good outcome. Biocontrol is not a standalone method, and it's only one of multiple tools that can be used against invasive species. And if used right, it can be a significant weapon in a multi-stage war against ecological invaders. So next time someone brings up cane toads as their shining example of how science goes wrong, you can say, well, actually, and show them that some scientists have learned and grown a lot since then, and we're actually doing pretty good. Just as a side note, it's interesting to consider that cane toad is often brought up as the example of bad ideas from the past and of invasive species causing havoc. And yet, as far as we can tell, they're not actually responsible for any extinctions. Most native animal populations adapt pretty quickly to their presence. Now compare the public image of the cane toad to that of the cat, which is often overlooked in these conversations. And you can see the difference that a pretty face and a quirky personality can make in persuading people not to pay attention to the evidence.
Hallo aan alle Nederlandse luisteraars. Op dit moment bent u aan het luisteren naar de Skeptic Zone, voor wetenschap en kritisch nadenken. Voor meer informatie ga naar www.skepticzone.tv.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. And, thank you to that person who commented on the YouTube channel of the Skeptic Zone for last week's episode, saying that they didn't listen to the show because they couldn't listen to those people at the paranormal convention talking to Maynard. You know what? Once or twice every year, I'm going to probably run interviews with believers, so to speak, people with a completely different outlook, people who really do think the UFOs are aliens visiting us and conspiracies are real or crystals can actually have power. or no end of nonsense, because it's important that we, from time to time, we hear what these people have to say. I've always taken that approach, and that's why I go to Mind, Body, Wallet and other expos 2, 3, 4 times a year to talk to these people, hear what they have to say, and it puts me in a much better position. For example, many years ago, I just assumed that a lot of these people were lying, frauds, fakes, con artists, out for a quick buck. But of course, now I don't think that at all. I think a tiny percentage are, but most of the ones I've certainly talked with and met are sincere and genuine, and they really do believe that crystals have magical powers, and you can determine someone's fate by looking at their handwriting, or auras are real, and on it goes. But it's important to know this. Thank you to those people who recently have come on board with Patreon. Now, as I've mentioned over the last few months on the Skeptic Zone, the Australian dollar is going down the gurgler, glug, 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 which means any contribution you make in US dollars at Patreon, and there's a link at skepticzone.tv, goes a lot further here. And I appreciate any contribution. Some people even chip in $1 a month, which adds up. It really does. Many people have decided to chip in $5 or $10 a month, and I thank you very, very much indeed. It's money that you won't miss. $10 a month is something that you'd scarcely notice, but it certainly adds up here at the Skeptic Zone. And congratulations to Maynard over at Planet Maynard over at maynard.com.au. He and Tim Ferguson have just released episode 50 of their podcast, Bunga Bunga. If you feel like something completely different to the Skeptic Zone, head over to maynard.com.au. And also I hear that the 2019 Maynard calendar is on its way. Coming up on next week's show, more from Skepticon, including an interview with Kate Brown, who was our MC. She's going to be talking about consumer activism and other things, including the pink tax. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
Okay.
What's that noise?
Okay, I'm ending it now. I was just fussing. Wait, here comes a cat. Stop. Go away. Well, actually, it's the end of the show. It's okay.
It's the end of the show. Susan Gerbic's joining me here, folks, at the end of the show with her cat, another skeptical cat on the other side of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good heavens. Does that cat want dinner or something?
He just wants attention.
Attention. Anyway, Susan, before me I have a 10-sided die. Folks at home and Susan over there in California, let's play along. In a moment I'm going to roll it, so use your mystical energies, your psychic prediction powers. Susan, what number do you see coming up?
5.
Okay, here we go. 7. Oh well. Let's try it again. Use your prediction power, everybody. And Susan, what do you see?
5.
5. All right. Oh, fell off the table. It always does that. All right, folks. This is not a setup. It's 5.
Yes!
I should video this just so everybody can see. This is absolutely honest. This is not a setup. 7, 5. Okay, Susan, one more number.
I think it's going to be 5 again.
5 again. I'll give it a good rattle. Here we go. And the last number is 1. So, folks, 7, 5, and 1. And Susan got 1 out of 3.
Well, that's pretty good. That's better than I usually do whenever I'm listening.